Welcome back, everybody. Hope you guys had a great Christmas. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how to get loud and punchy mixes. But before we dive in, if you need help getting your music mixed, shoot me an email at divinemotherstudios@gmail.com with details of your project. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, we're going to talk about saturation and its usefulness in metal mixes, especially in regards to controlling dynamics and creating perceived loudness. Now, a lot of the times the goal in a metal mix is to get a lot of aggression and clarity out of your mix while also getting a solid and dense mix at the same time. A lot of that is a bit contradictory, but that clarity and aggression and that solidness and that density can actually be achieved with saturation. There's a lot of dynamic range reduction happening when it comes to metal mixes, and I think this is more so than any other genre. Maybe EDM is the other one that kind of falls in line with the amount of dynamic control we need here. That saturation is going to allow us to accomplish those four goals or those four pillars in a pretty cool way. Now, this is something I learned when I took Jordan Valeria's hardcore mixing course back in 2016, where he took the Massey tape head plugin, put it on his snare top microphone track. My ears were telling me that it was actually louder, but the computer was saying that it was lower. So that perception of loudness is the actual key goal of saturation. So enough of my rambling, let's jump right into the mix. We got a song here that I mixed for my friend Roger, who's in the band called Gnosis. Let me just play you a snippet of the final mix here. So this was a very dynamic mix. If I was to zoom here on the snare tracks, you can see that there is a lot of dynamic range in between the hits. But you can see here, especially, like, there's pretty consistent. But then when I get to this area, there is a bit of fall off in terms of the dynamic range. So a lot of peaks here, but not so much loud here. And I needed to find a way to make the snare a lot more consistent and a lot more in your face, but without wanting to use compression to achieve this. So let me show you what the saturation plugin is doing in terms of dynamic range here. Now, I have the plugin turned off for now, and I just want you guys to check out the meter and see where it's standing. So there's a little bit of ghost notes in there, there's some harder hits and some medium hits in there. Now let me turn on the saturation plugin here, and I want you guys to hear, it's gonna sound louder, but it's actually gonna look the same on the meter. Very, very cool. This was the ultimate aha moment for me when I finally understood what to use saturation for on drums specifically. I used to clip a ton on my snare drums a lot. It would always be messing up my master bus and my drum bus. Now, also, if you guys noticed that while it was still sitting at the same level and it sounded louder, the disparity between the loud peaks and the smaller peaks have actually shrunk. So let me play that for you again. So the low peaks are around minus 12 and the high peaks are around minus 6. Let's turn this back on and let's see where they stand now. So the disparity has shrunk maybe about 3 dB. So we were between -12 and -6. Now we're probably looking around -9 and -6. Saturation is going to be your secret weapon to control dynamics, and as well as to increase the loudness. Let me go ahead and give you guys another example. Here's the snare sample that I have. Let me go ahead and turn this on, and let's just check out how it sounds now. So again, there's that perceived loudness being reintroduced into the signal, and a lot of the dynamic range has been cut practically in half. There's not a lot of those ups and downs that we were getting before, and it sounds louder, so that's what we want in our metal mixes. Now, I don't just do this on drums, I do use it on bass and as well as guitar. And I have found that saturation on bass guitar actually is a very good way for it to be translated on smaller speakers, such as headphones, on your phone, on a laptop, or anything that doesn't reproduce the frequencies of a bass guitar very well. Saturation is a great tool to introduce the upper harmonics of that particular range to allow you guys to hear it on smaller platforms. So let me play you the bass really quick. And here is the saturation off. Now you are getting some of that perceived volume increase when I have this on, but I'm not really using it for that. I'm using that to reintroduce some of the low mid frequencies that I'm EQing out. If I was to boost this with EQ, it would just sound pretty shitty. I don't really want to do that. I want to do it with saturation. I don't know how to describe it, and I don't know the science behind it, but for some reason, when I cut them with EQ and I reintroduce those low mid frequencies with saturation, to me it sounds like a lot better, and it translates a lot better across the mix. Here's the bass again, and I'm just going to quickly A/B them as it's running so you guys can hear what I'm talking about. So it's pretty subtle. If you got a good pair of headphones or some good monitors, you guys would be able to hear what I'm talking about. But this is a key move for me, actually. I use this kind of saturation all the time. Not particularly this plugin, but just the type of saturation. You know, I have a few other ones in my toolbox. And if this one's not working, I'll pull out a different one and give that one a shot. But the concept stays the same. I'm trying to add low mids with some saturation so that it translates across different speakers and different systems a lot easier. It also makes the bass sound a little bit louder in the mix without actually increasing the volume of the mix, making my mix bus compressor not overreact. Now, I also added some saturation to guitars as well, and let me just show you how that sounds. And it's somewhat the same goal when it comes to guitars, but instead of using saturation to get the low mids added back into the guitars, I'm actually using it more as a way to just to increase everything that's kind of going on the guitar. So that could be like the low mids, the mid range, the high, like a broad spectrum sweep of increased perceived loudness with the saturator. So I hope that was pretty clear. I'm going to show that on the bass as well. It might be a little bit harder to hear on the bass, but just kind of turn up the volume a little bit and just really pay attention to the low end and how, especially if you're listening on headphones or on smaller speakers, the bass kind of disappears when I turn off the saturation plugin. So if you guys are still having trouble kind of hearing all of this, I highly suggest kind of rewinding the video and going through the sections where I A/B everything so you guys can really understand what's happening here behind the scenes. Saturation is ultimately going to be the tool that you guys are going to be able to rely on the most when it comes to giving you guys a perception of increased loudness without having to worry about a lot of those elements, especially when it comes to drums, peaking any of your meters, any of your compressors. And something that I've actually started experimenting with recently is actually adding saturation prior to any compression. This mix, unfortunately, was before I started experimenting with that. But the reason I'm saying that is because sometimes the compressors overreact when I'm trying to compress a snare. So I'm experimenting with adding the saturation prior to my compressors to see if that can kind of control how they're reacting and see if I can get a little bit more glue out of everything when it comes to dynamic control. Now, in terms of saturation on my mix bus, I have some console saturation going on, and I have noticed as well, it does basically the same thing as pretty much any other saturator here. It's It's going to kind of reduce the dynamic range and kind of just give you a little bit of extra volume without actually increasing the volume on the meter. So without the constant saturation, I feel like the mix lost a little bit of its excitement. Now, also the character of this constant saturation, it does seem to me that it does kind of control the mid-range as well. And I feel like it aided my mix to get a little bit louder without actually being louder, and added some pretty cool high end and low end as well. So that's pretty much it for this video. I really just wanted to share with you guys my experience using saturation and see if maybe it's something that you guys can use in your mixes, as I find it extremely useful and critical in my own personal workflow. I think it's pretty indispensable actually for a modern metal mixer to use some kind of saturation to control peaks and add a perception of loudness to their mixes. So if you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.